Hello and welcome back to Now You Know. I'm your host, Dale Wilson. Our special guest today is Acting Chief Brian Smith of Port Angeles Police Department. And we're here to talk about a new program that is going to be very interesting to a lot of people. It's called CLEAN, C-L-E-A-N, and we'll let Brian get right to the point and telling us exactly what that means. Brian, welcome and thank you for coming.
Well, hi Dale, and thank you for having me. And we appreciate the opportunity to talk about this initiative that we embarked on, this winter in collaboration with a couple of community groups, PACAN, Public Health, and we've had some help from a law enforcement agency out in Massachusetts, Arlington PD. But what CLEAN is an acronym for Clallam Law Enforcement Action Network. The idea is law enforcement using their sort of symbolic leadership and their visibility in the community, people's access to us, and the fact that we're often involved and around people who have addiction issues. So that's the sort of the idea that we're easy to find and we have the capacity to get people help. You know that the county reported 41 overdoses, year to date, and 5 deaths. So we continue to have a problem with heroin and other opiates, and we have people on the street every day, living in the community every day, that need help. They need help with detox. They need help with treatment. They need help, getting themselves on a different trajectory. And I'm not them, but I can imagine how difficult that circumstance must be. So we're using the example from Massachusetts, which started last summer, that law enforcement being the leadership, sort of being the focal point, as people approach us, call us, contact us, we bring in people behind us. People who are clinicians, people who are social workers, people who are medical people, and we become the conduit to getting someone to the emergency room, getting them to counseling, getting them over to specialty services for detox or treatment, and sort of changing their path, changing the trajectory, and the goal being one less person that's sort of left out there in the cold.
Well, you're changing the perception too, because I think that if I was a user, if I was an addict and I saw a policeman come up, I'm not sure I would walk up to him and ask for help. So
right.
What are you doing? What kind of training are you providing the people on the street to make them more warm and fuzzy?
Well, interestingly, that's a really good question, Dale. The training actually comes from like what I'm doing here, educating people as to what our objective is, what we have to offer, and how things really work. And so Angie Gooding with PACAN, who actually, this was her idea. She discovered this thing in Massachusetts, and communicating with her and other people involved, the first hurdle was explain to people how things work versus how they thought things work. The idea that people are being put in jail just because they're an addict, because they're a drug user. Well, it is illegal to have heroin. It's illegal, obviously, to sell it, possess, transport it. You really can't in Washington be jailed for being an addict. If you're charged with, say, possession of heroin, you're invariably charged with another crime as well. So if you didn't commit another crime and you have heroin and it's in your person and you hand it to a law enforcement officer, it's going to be put in evidence. Whatever you got's taken away from you, but it won't be referred for prosecution because there's really no mechanism to do that. And you could ask Mark Nichols that question and he would tell you what his office would do. So part of what we're doing is to get people to know if they call us and they ask us for help and they hand us whatever they've got left, and usually it won't be much. And that's often why people are calling, because they've got an addiction problem and they don't have any more heroin and they need help. So we're going to try to help them. And we, because we're part of the criminal justice system, we know a lot of things and ways to get people help. We know people, and we have access to mental health, we have access to EMS, we have access to the hospital. And the idea of working the phones or stopping what you're doing to help somebody, which isn't perfect. And the idea is the better organized we are with this program, the less likely someone gets lost in the shuffle. As soon as we affiliated with this program, as soon as we became somebody you could find on the PARI website, we got a phone call from a police department in Massachusetts who, somebody I'd never met, said someone just called us from Washington who read about the PARI program, and they're over somewhere, and they gave me a name of a town in Snohomish County. Is that near you guys? Well, not exactly, but how can we get a hold of them? So I reached out to Christina Hurst at Public Health, who's been helping us with this project. And between Christina and I, we figured out who this person was and how to get a hold of them. And so from the law enforcement side, we worked with the sheriff's department over there to make sure the person was safe. There was a few more facts. We wanted to make sure we didn't have somebody in immediate need that needed law enforcement help. Well, she was able to make contact and back and forth and figure out how can we get you from where you are into treatment. It turned out, and this is just a circumstance, the closest treatment and detox was actually right here.
Wow.
So Chris was able to arrange some transportation, and this is all stuff on the phone, and got this person, into help. And that's purely because we had some presence that someone could, by Googling, could find somebody who could call us. And that could have been done informally, but a lot of times a person in crisis or a person who needs help, everything that's hard is really hard. So we made it a little bit easier, and we've had a couple of referrals that are just like that. They came out of the blue and from places that we wouldn't have expected, and they require us to stop what we're doing, and that's the hard part. Officers are busy; they're going from call to call, or the detectives are investigating stuff, or I'm supposed to be in my office working on my budget, or doing administrative stuff. But the more we're able to coordinate all these resources and get people sort of tuned in on what we can do, the more efficient we are, and we've actually seen some success.
About how long, on that particular dynamic you were talking about how long did it take from the time you got the call until they made contact with the person that needed the help?
I would say within an hour, and the hardest part was actually just finding the person.
That's fascinating.
But and they were far away, and we didn't expect that would be our first referral. I've called some of the community members who were participating in this, on their cell phone and said, I've got so-and-so standing in the lobby, or I'm alongside the road and I'm on my way to work, and the fire department's with somebody and it looks like they're going to be going to the ER. Are you able to help them? And there's actually people out there that on their own have been doing this outreach anyway. So moving forward, looking forward to having, say, somebody who was a clinician who had like a graduate background in social work or nursing or something like that, who could coordinate all this stuff, could be the point of contact and be the person that once we called them, they would find the volunteer, they would find the pathfinders, we call them, to get somewhere where they need to go. And Arlington, Massachusetts, in March, sent one of their captains out, Julie Flaherty, who runs the program in Arlington, Massachusetts PD. They found some funding. They're doing almost all of it themselves because they don't have this great network of partners that we have here. So like the naloxone that we do, they had to do that themselves and get the money for it. The volunteers and the pathfinders and the clinicians, they had to get all that. So they run that through the police department. I think here we would be better off having someone else do it, and the police department and law enforcement, help them. There's no one way to do it. It's the idea, it's the destination, and assembling all the parts. But we learned a lot from Julie being out here for 3 days. She gave a presentation with us over at the county commission, and we hope to actually maybe do an exchange with them. We'd love to go see how they do things. And they've had some success. That PARI group was hosted in the White House last week. Gloucester and the rest of the police departments there were actually, the White House was so interested in what they were doing, they invited them to come talk about it.
So it's rushed across the country, you might as well say.
In a way, yeah. And the idea is, every time you get new information, sort of change your paradigm on how you do things. For us, it's not much of a change. It's mostly just coordinating what we already have and helping people understand. Law enforcement has a lot of different roles. We can't solve all the society's problems, but we're often stuck with the outcomes anyway. We're stuck with crime. We're stuck with with violence when it happens. So anything we can do to prevent that is something that we've improved the world, and we're able to do something else, say, to help you.
Well, my guess is every time you can help someone get clean, that probably sends down property crimes by one junkie, $8,000 or $10,000
well,
a year.
Actually, and if you think about what someone is going through who's committing property crime, if you commit a burglary, it's a serious crime. Your life is heading down a pathway there's no way that story ends except the criminal justice system. It's serious. You're breaking into someone's business or house, stealing their stuff. You're committing a serious crime.
Or you get shot by a homeowner.
Right, which it's a remote chance, but sure, it could happen. But the idea is you're engaging in a criminal lifestyle, and let's say you've got addiction as the reason you're doing that, you're still engaging in a criminal lifestyle. So if we can get people off that train, and let's say they haven't ruined their lives, let's say they haven't oftentimes we don't have anything to prosecute someone for anyway. We don't know enough. And you know, when I get asked like by people like you in the media to give an example of a burglary or a theft or a car prowl that doesn't have a drug nexus, I can't find one. I'm not saying they're 100%, but I can't find them. So we know where the source of those problems are that are affecting the community, and if we can remove the source of those problems, the community's got a higher quality of life, and we all can breathe a little bit easier.
You don't think they're breaking into homes to buy fishing tackle?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think that's what's going on.
Brian, you mentioned Noxalone a while ago, and some people may not know exactly what that is. That's a paradigm shift too, isn't it?
Well, law enforcement has always provided, emergency medical help. We do it as an adjunct to the fire department. So they've got the paramedics, but often we're a little closer. And we, in 2014 in the fall, talked to this company that makes this product here. It's an auto injector, and this is an expired unit, but it's an injector that if you
are ready to use, pull off red safety guard.
so it tells you what to do. It's got some needles here, so if you pull that off and you touch, say, the deltoid muscle, it'll inject the dose and then it'll retract.
You are ready to use, pull off.
Now, for some reason, I thought it was inhaled nasally or something.
Well,
like
that's the other version of the product, and
There's one, okay.
we've transitioned to that because it's cheaper, and it's got it's a nasal delivery. It's a higher dose. This is a 0.4, and the nasal's 4 milligrams because it's harder to absorb it through your nostrils. But naloxone is also called Narcan by another brand name. It only responds if you've got an opioid substance, so like morphine, heroin. It's got to have something that's got an opiate, or it doesn't have any effect otherwise. So it's a drug that, for all intents and purposes, has almost no side effects you can measure. So it's very safe to use, and it's diagnostic. If someone responds to this, they absolutely have an opioid. We find people unconscious, unresponsive, either not breathing or barely breathing. Very easy to deliver, and we deliver one dose, wait, deliver another dose. Usually the fire department follows up with advanced life support measures, and we've had 18 instances since March of 15 where we've had resuscitations, where people either were not breathing, in some cases CPR was being performed, or they were deeply unconscious. We had a couple other instances where the person was unfortunately deceased, and this didn't do any good. But I mean, we think that's a pretty high success rate.
Pharmacologically, do you know how that works? What does it?
Well, it opposes a receptor, so it takes away. I could read this and think about it, but it's essentially taking away the receptor, so your body doesn't recognize for the period of time that the drug's active that you've got a narcotic flowing through. So however you were before the drug is how you are now. So it's
So
like waking people
just
up.
blocks the receptor cells that are normally taking up the
Yeah, and the mechanism would be a little more complex to describe accurately, but it essentially blocks the action of the drug to where before heroin or whatever you had, morphine, however you were, that's how you are. So people wake up quickly once it's circulated, and the effects are gone. So they start breathing, for example.
Great.
What's suppressing their central nervous system is no longer. So the biggest positive effect is bringing the breathing back.
Okay, we're going to come back in just a few minutes and talk a little bit about how the heroin gets here and
Sure.
How to stop it. We'll be right back with Acting Chief Brian Smith. I'm Dale Wilson for Now You Know. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back to Now You Know. I'm your host, Dale Wilson. Today's special guest is Acting Chief of Police Brian Smith, and we're talking about a great program called CLEAN. And this is a program that is going to make a lot of difference in a lot of lives here in Port Angeles, Clallam County, and around the world. Brian, you've been in law enforcement for quite some time. Just give us an idea, how long have you been in law enforcement?
Well, I started in law enforcement, Dale, in 1981 as a law enforcement park ranger at a place called Golden Gate National Recreation Area, which is Marin County, California.
And you left there?
I grew up there, and that's where I was from, so that was where my first law enforcement ranger job was. And like a lot of people, I wanted to be challenged, and the park ranger job had everything. It had outdoors, it had law enforcement, emergency medicine, search and rescue, and I was from there. So that took me to a 27-year career with the National Park Service. Then it took me to applying to the deputy chief job here and moving here in 2008 from Yellowstone National Park. So had a lot of great assignments and experiences in between. And I left the field, so to speak, being a field practitioner in 1998 when I took a job at the Law Enforcement Academy as an instructor. And then from there I was a supervisory agent, then a special agent in charge for a region. So I was in a management, almost indoor job, but still in a national park and still part of the Park Service.
Ever do any undercover work?
I supervised people that did undercover work, and people that worked the border down in Arizona in a what we call a HIDTA task force. I had 2 agents that were part of that, and spent a little bit of time with them down there on the border, which is where ground zero of where this problem starts.
Oh yeah. Brian, since 1981, you have seen these epidemics of crack and meth and now heroin. In your opinion, which one is the worst for the society and worse for the user?
Well, that's a good question, Dale. I think anything that's an illicit substance that creates negative impacts for the user and for society are things that people should be really wary of and careful of. Taking a powerful substance that could end your life, that has no regulatory control, you have no idea what's in the product, and you have, and you're not a trained person to administer it, and you're doing it for purposes of addiction, instant gratification, whatever. None of that's good. So, I've seen those. I guess I've seen those trends kind of go full circle a couple of times. I've watched, like over marijuana, we had a park ranger in 2002 in Oregon Pipe, a young man named Chris Egley. He was murdered by drug traffickers, and I believe the drug trafficking was marijuana. I mean, that's how serious and violent the business is down there. Anything that's illicit, that's outside the norms, if it doesn't have a label, if it's not sitting on a pharmacy shelf, and it hasn't been vetted, so to speak, as a safe substance, it's something that you don't want your kids to be around, and it creates bad outcomes for society, like you're talking about with crack, with marijuana cultivation on public lands, which isn't a problem here, but in many places it's one of the biggest problems they have.
And most dangerous.
And it was dangerous for a lot of reasons. It pollutes the environment. It's a taking of property. It's actually stealing property from you and me, the taxpayer, and it has violence and things behind it. When I moved here in 2009 or 2008, methamphetamine was a significant problem. It's been eclipsed by heroin, and methamphetamine is a secondary problem now. Heroin is, those trends have to do with supply, demand, the change in the product, the change in the users, how the drug trafficking organizations decide to smuggle people, and that's the other thing. They smuggle human beings and they smuggle product, and then money returns typically south of here. But it's a whole network of an illicit business that has its own rules, norms, and structure, and it exists outside of society as you and I know it.
From your experience, would a person be using meth and heroin at the same time? It seemed like one is an upper and one is a downer.
Yeah, some people do it, and you could ask a user as to why they prefer one or another. I think a lot of times it's what someone gets used to, or somebody becomes addicted to, or what they can access. Some of our biggest cases here on the dealers, like that the OpNet has made, were the dealers or the traffickers. They were involved in both. They were equal opportunity. Whatever worked for them to sell a product.
Well, I know the
they would
traffickers
do.
would, but would you typically find, say in a urine screen of a suspected user, would you find both meth and heroin?
I don't think so, but I don't know.
I wouldn't think so either. I just wanted.
That's a question you could ask somebody like a narcotics detective. My sense is the answer would be no. Both are significantly altering, conscious level altering drugs. So some users migrate from one to the other. Some users prefer one.
Coming at it from a different way, you were mentioning a while ago that if it's not on a pharmacist's shelf or have a label on it, that could also be used as an argument toward either decriminalizing or legalizing heroin. Just hypothetically thinking,
Sure.
would that be?
Well, there's a version of everything that sits on a shelf. I mean, it's whether it's accessible through a prescription. There's pharmaceutical versions of just about anything that's out there illicitly that's got a label on it. There's pharmaceutical cocaine. There's morphine, which is similar in its effects to, say, heroin. Once something is part of a normal system, law enforcement can move on to something else. So, the idea is there's actually a mechanism to make anything that your U.S. Congress decides that's got a viability in terms of treatment or can go through a process. And so you go to a pharmacy and see how much stuff is sitting there with a label, and it's stuff that you and I don't even know what it is. So, that's the legal side of stuff. But to have legal stuff, you have to enforce the law on the illegal stuff.
Right.
Or you can choose a society, for example, to say that we just won't regulate substances.
There's not really been a lot of negative effect, according to initial reports coming out. Crimes haven't gone up. In fact, when you do decriminalize something, it takes a lot of the risk out of it, so that brings the price down. And so
Right.
if you have a $100 a day habit when it's illegal, you might have a $10 a day habit afterwards. And so that means you only have to steal one gold necklace that day instead of two.
Sure. Now, that obviously, those kind of things take a thoughtful approach, and there isn't like an easy way to predict outcomes, and societies are different. But like you made a point about when the price changes, the behavior changes. When the economics are no longer there because, say, it's not as complicated to get it to wherever you're going. But normally illegal, like even if it's legalized, there's still people out there vying for the business. Like if they're not regulated, that's where organized crime comes in, and that's where drug trafficking. It might be legal, say, in a destination like Portugal, but there's a bunch of people getting it there that aren't people like, say, you and me,
Right.
who might play by different rules. And so that's still unless it's like produced locally and it's, you could argue maybe marijuana has taken that path in Washington because the enforcement is different than it was. But at the end of the day, legislatures control that stuff. Legislatures decide how something's going to be regulated, what it's going to be called, and they do that based on on voters and what appears to be a good choice. We are very interested in harm reduction, and we're very interested in reducing bad outcomes from anything. And we also enforce the law. I mean, we live by the rule of law. So, like when we get asked questions about what we law enforcement collectively what we think. Often what we think is if it's illegal, it's illegal, and if it's not illegal, it's not. I mean, it isn't really up to us.
Right.
But one of the challenges is when you have something that's got penalties and laws attached to it, but then for whatever reason they're not enforced. That creates sort of a dichotomy in the whole structure of society that has, like I wonder sometimes people doing their federal tax returns who are participating in Washington's program, how it works. I don't know. I've never asked any of them, but it's legal here, but not legal there, so to speak.
Right.
So yeah, a lot of good questions on that.
Brian, getting back to the CLEAN program, what sort of funding have you got set up for this?
Well, the police department, don't have any funding set up for it. We're hoping some of the interested parties are going to be successful in maybe getting one of the various grant programs that are out there, either for a 1-year recurring type program or other. I mean, it's going to ultimately come out of grant funding. It could come from a variety of sources, and there's some opportunities out there to, like the jail has a registered nurse that's funded through the Hargrove funds right now. That comes out of sales tax money, and it's got specific things it can be used for. Right now, we have one person working in part of the harm reduction, the needle exchange. So, sort of a consortium of people are working on that. How that'll look at the end, I don't know. But the more we work on this, the more we discover new information.
How many addicts do we have in Port Angeles or Cobb
No
County?
idea. That would be, doing a guess on that would be very hard. Christina Hurst from, Colum County Public Health could tell you how many people that her organization services in terms of the needle exchange, but they wouldn't tell you everything you wanted to know. It would just give you a number of people in her program. That's a question that probably, given the difference in, not everybody is what you think they are. Not everybody fits a stereotype.
Oh, I know it. I know
and
it.
so, the idea of part of this harm reduction is to reduce the stigma of people, being stigmatized for asking for help. The fact that there is a stigma means we're not going to know everything about who.
Well, I've heard it said there's going to be about 10 or 12% of the people that are going to abuse drugs. And
Sure.
they're going to be 10% of the lawyers, 10% of the doctors, 10% of the policemen, 10% of the entire cross-section of society. And of course, they're going to be found out and maybe change their work
Right.
after a while. But if there's a small percentage, and I'm sure 10% is relative,
Right.
but it's small. How many busts are you making for street level, and how many busts are you making for
Well,
major traffickers?
I don't know the answer to street level and major traffickers. OpNet could, we did a community outreach with OpNet in April. They did a community event over at the Board of Commissioners, and people from the community actually came, and the OpNet detectives and the supervisors were there, just talking about how they do things and how they work cases and how they assemble stuff. The volume of their work isn't really how you measure them. It's more like the case study. So we have a house in the city that we became aware of about a year and a half ago. I had a gentleman who lived in a neighborhood. He just moved here from California. He had activity next door to him that was clearly drug trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
Short stay stuff, late at night, other vehicles coming and going, and people that was really apparent. So the patrol officers, the detectives, and the drug enforcement detectives from OpNet sort of collaborated on this, but it took a long time. And being able to put together facts, like what you know versus what you prove, are different things. So that took the better part of a year before that became a case, and as you would call it, a bust. It was a search warrant, arrests were made, things were seized, a drug trafficking organization was dismantled, disrupted. It might reappear someone else, but if you go to that neighborhood today, that behavior is not there.
When you have a situation like that, and you're already setting up surveillance on it, can't you follow I know it's easier said than done, but
Right.
can't you follow the supply on up the line, whoever's
Well, that's-
supplying him?
The Drug Task Force, that's one of their primary objectives, is to always pursue the information as far in the organization as they go. They're very good at collaborating with other task forces, with the DEA, and often things will actually go into parallel, like there'll be parallel efforts. There'll be the pursuit of the information and the people, however far they can go in the organization. There'll be the local effort that will continue. One of the kind of myths is that people think that if we're working, say, with OpNet, that we leave, say, a street alone. We might leave it alone if they tell us specifically they're doing something, but normally we all sort of carry out our roles, and often we're successful because we continue our street enforcement, we continue to deal with quality of life crimes, we continue to, stop people who are driving cars with taillights out and, parking in the middle of the street. And meanwhile, we don't know everything, but often the OpNet detectives are also working, they're informants, they're working on buys, they're collaborating with other task forces, they're gathering information. And it doesn't have to happen, one's not exclusive of the other. And often we won't necessarily even know how far that case went.
Have you lobbied the sheriff on the drug task force money and the things that with civil forfeitures, and use some of that to fund this clean program?
Well, that's a really good question, because in Massachusetts, that's what the police chief did.
Terrific.
He had
Hold that
access.
thought for just 1 second,
Sure.
and we're going to take a break, and
Okay.
we'll be right back. We're going to take a break talking with Acting Chief Brian Smith. I'm Dale Wilson, your host on Now You Know. We'll be right back. Hi, and welcome back to Now You Know. I'm Dale Wilson, your host. We're visiting now with Brian Smith. Brian's telling us about a very important program called CLEAN, which is actually helping people get clean. So, Brian, tell us how people can get involved with this program and what the benefits are.
Well, so we've talked a little bit about this emerging program that's a partnership between law enforcement, clinicians, providers, health people, social workers, treatment facilities, and there's going to be a component to this that's going to be a cadre of volunteers, people that have, and we've got people in the community doing it already. We've actually got some community members who have already, on their own, and some of it was with communication with us, but they've figured out how to do it, or do an outreach amongst known users who we encounter every day. Some will accept help, some won't. Some have psychological issues as well as an addiction issue, and they've Some of them have been go-to people when we need help. We ask them, how can you help us? So this would be a more organized, formal program where, one way would go is we'd vet volunteers out just like we do now. We have police volunteers who we do a background investigation on, we interview, we determine are you suitable to be part of a government organization.
Well, they're wearing your uniform. So
yeah, you're wearing our uniform, so do you want to be part of that? Well, 2 of our volunteers are also clean outreach people.
Great.
And we've created a category in the police volunteers for that being one of the community functions they can do. And I don't think that the program in the police department is necessarily the best place, but it's a place that could exist. But the idea being that when you asked about opportunities for people, once we're able to better define what this role looks like and explain to people how you would get involved and what kind of training, we're hoping that people have an interest in doing this, might consider doing this as, as community outreach, with the idea being that well-trained and well-coordinated people will be behind you and be part of it, and you won't be doing an ad hoc thing. You'll be doing something that's got a structure and a format to it that you'll be able to do some good. And people will ask us a lot of times, like, what can I do about the drug problem, or how can I help? The answer that we give is, start with your own world, the world that you influence, the people around you that you care about, that you influence, that you work with, that you live near. That's the place to start with that. Behaviors that people ignore that are unhealthy are often where this starts. But this program is something just a little bit beyond that. It's not just the world you influence, it's us sort of participating in a collaborative way, community way, government, private, and individuals towards something that, like as you said, it's already proven where they're doing it, that it's had some positive positive outcomes. So we're very excited about the idea, and we can't take credit for it. Angie Gooding, a community member, she's the one that found it.
Yeah,
she
Angie's doing a
brought
great
it to
job
Terry and I
in
and said, "What do you guys think of it?" Well, at the time we didn't know anything about it. We had nothing to say. We didn't think anything. But we became intrigued, and the more we've become part of it, the more I think it's actually we're onto something.
You were talking about somebody that wants to do something, and you said start with your own sphere of influence. I'm thinking of an intervention. A family member wants to do an intervention with a family member that may be using or getting close to it. How do you start that conversation?
That's, I've never done that, so I don't know how you, as an individual, but what I know is you have to start somewhere and paying attention to the behavior. People normally wind up, once they decide they need help, with some kind of medical screening, emergency room, physician, someone that is able to medically tell you, you do have a substance problem. Once you're in that pathway, whether it's going to detox, whether it's going through treatment, there's a defined place you can go, and there's people along the way that'll help you. That'll say, "I've been there. I know what you're going through." Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous. Some of the meetings, like some of the community outreach groups have had, where they brought, Oxford House. One of the parts of this program that we have done already is the regular community outreach meetings. So we pick a subject, and Christina Hurst has led 2 of them, and we'll probably have different people lead them, as we invite the community to participate in exactly that, like just that question right there. That could be a topic, and we might have the public health physician, we might have some RNs, some social workers scattered amongst community members, and the idea would be to provide sort of an information dialogue session on how exactly that happens.
Do you anticipate setting up a 501c3, a charitable organization that would be able to take in?
I think it depends on who gets it, and maybe somebody who's already got one. My thought would be somebody who becomes the sort of keeper of it. They've already got that. And so the idea is obviously donations. I know Everett, Washington PD, they've already got a clean party program. They've got something like that. The chief told me that they put it together, and they take donation money so they can transport people. And because transportation is how you get people to treatment facilities. And many of them are places that are far enough away that you have to get on a plane, but it's not that expensive to fly one way to Palm Springs, where I guess one of the facilities is, and get yourself into treatment.
You certainly don't want to put them on a bus, I guess.
Well, it's however you do it. A lot of times there's
a lot of distractions
sure.
between here and there
yeah.
on the bus.
And a lot of times getting yourself far away from wherever your problems are, you're away from familiar stuff, so you can focus on success. I mean, a lot of the facilities, I mean, of course, they need to get paid. So part of these programs, what I learned from Arlington is they figured out how to help whoever's helping them do the paperwork. And like the treatment facility we've got here in the city, they've figured out exactly how to get, you can't do this stuff for free, so, there's costs in getting people to, participate in, doing their paperwork and getting reimbursed, so to speak.
All right, Brian, I'm a user and I just suddenly decide I want to get clean and I come up to you and say I want to get clean. How long is it going to take before I can get in front of a professional that can actually begin that process?
I don't know. Depending on the day, depending on the circumstance, depending how well organized we are. Normally the first step, like if they're going to get into, say, the treatment facility here in the city, they have to go to the emergency room first or get cleared. So getting them there, somebody sitting with them, somebody getting them back, if the treatment facility or the detox facility has space, or in some cases getting them over to counseling. That's actually the challenge of this program, because you can't answer those questions and you don't want people to get lost in the shuffle. The hardest part about this is being able to be patient enough while you're multitasking to get someone into the system where you don't just hand them off and then they get lost.
Give us an idea of the procedure for a volunteer who wants to get involved with this. Of course, he's going to get some orientation and training. How would that go and how long would it be before?
Well, so I mean, one of the ways it'll go is that a person will be vetted out, background investigated, get some training, and then they would exist as sort of a cadre of sort of on-call people. They would organize themselves. In Massachusetts, there's actually a group called Wicked Sober that the police department in Arlington, that's the volunteer cadre, and they just call one person with Wicked Sober, and they organize the connection, the response, the transportation, and then their clinician who works for Arlington PD, she coordinates stuff with them, but they manage the volunteer cadre. It's a group that's got a name and it's existed for a while. That's sort of yet to be determined, but the idea being if that's what somebody wanted to do, they would be part of something that's identifiable that, like one of our ideas was to do an MOU with County Public Health or with some county organization and run it that way. That's still under discussion. Private organizations can often do it easier and there's a little less complexity when they do it. So.
And are you doing much of a civic outreach now? Are you talking?
Well, what we're doing right now is all of us that are part of it have been doing outreach. Chris Frank and Chris Hurst and I went on Todd Ortloff show, the three of us, and did the same thing we're doing here. We talked about it and got some great questions. Angie Gooding with PA Can has actually been hosting the sort of the clean meetings and sort of bringing people together. That's a continuing effort. Chris Hurst has organized some of the outreach. And Amy Miller, who's another community member, has put together some of those other outreach. And we're working on the effort right now as sort of the building, the foundation stage. I don't know where the program's going to go, but if we can keep the momentum going, we know we have the problem.
Whom should one call right now if they were motivated by this program and wanted to get involved? Whom should they call?
Well, they could find me on the police department website and just click and send me a message and tell me what you're thinking. I know Angie Gooding would love to hear from people. I'm sure Christine Hurst over at Public Health and Chris Frank would say the same thing. Anybody that's interested in the program could reach out to them. And we're just all little parts of it right now. We're just pieces of the puzzle.
And I would presume that anybody that wants to get clean would just hail any police officer, or whom else would they?
Well, I mean, that's, the program's moving forward.
Is the Sheriff's Department on board with this?
Well, not yet, but we're gonna make this a law enforcement effort to where the resource would be available to any law enforcement officer that was going to call. So they, it would be their resource just like our resource.
Right.
Arlington has figured out how to do outreach to people, like when they do a drug operation. Law enforcement often knows people. So they actually have their clinician call people up or go visit them and knock on their door and say, hey, we think you're involved in this because this is what we know. The chief told me that a third of the people that they do that sort of cold outreach actually take them up on it.
A third?
A third of them actually have a successful, so the other 2/3 it doesn't work. But for a third of them, more or less, that kind of, sort of aggressive outreach, they yield some positive results.
That sounds like a huge
and that was a surprise to them. They didn't think that would be that much success. Our stuff has all been informal. We've called people to scenes. We've had people come to the lobby and wait for somebody. We're still doing this informally, and it's a lot harder to do it, but we're trying to gain the idea of the momentum of doing outreach to people who right now are out in the cold.
That one statistic makes me think there's some room for study right there, because if 33% will respond to
Yeah.
a positive outreach,
Right.
it makes me think that somebody just needs to know that somebody cares.
Right, exactly. That's what I think our conversation with Arlington, Massachusetts Police Department, they didn't expect that, a third of the people were receptive to getting help. The fact is the other 2/3 weren't. I mean, it would be nice if everybody was, but that was a high enough number that gave them some positive feedback that they're on the right track there.
Well, Brian, you have done an excellent job of presenting this program, and
Well,
you
thank you.
certainly made me want to get more involved with it.
Okay.
And if there's anything that Papa can do to help you spread the word, do a telethon or something like that, I
Okay.
certainly hope you'll approach
Well,
us
we're
about
looking
that.
forward to coming back and talking to you more about it.
Well, I
So-
want to hear more successes as you get
Very
further
good.
with it. Brian, really
Thank you,
enjoyed
sir.
it. Thank you. Thanks for your time. And thanks for your time today listening to Now You Know. I'm your host, Dale Wilson, and we'll be back soon. Thank you.